The drums began before sunset. They rolled like thunder across the golden city of Ramesses, the capital of the gods and the home of Egypt's living son, Pharaoh Ramesses the Great. From the riverbanks to the temple gates, the air shimmered with heat, incense, and fear. Every rooftop burned with torches. Every street pulsed with music. And every heart, on every trembling heart, knew this night was sacred. It was the festival of renewal, when the Pharaoh renewed his power through offerings to the gods, and through rituals that the common people were never allowed to see. Inside the marble walls of the Temple of Hathor, where no man without divine blood could walk, stood a young girl. Her name was Nephru, 15 years old, barely a woman. And tonight, she would be given to the gods. The air was thick, not with silence, but with the whispers of silk and the rustle of gold. Priestesses brushed scented oils on Nephru's skin, their fingers trembling, their eyes lowered. They spoke no words, for to speak would break the spell. The perfume of lotus oil hung heavy, sweet, intoxicating, like honey burning under the sun. Smoke from myrrh curled through the air, touching the ceiling painted with blue stars and the golden face of Hathor, the goddess of love, music, and pleasure. Outside, the people danced and sang. Inside, Nephru stood, her body glowing under the light of 100 oil lamps. Her only clothing was a thin veil of linen, so sheer it looked like mist. Around her neck hung a single amulet, the Eye of Horus, meant to protect her from the very gods she was about to meet. She could hear them chanting her name, Nephru, Nephru, Nephru. Not in devotion, not in love, but in ceremony, the sound of 1,000 mouths preparing to send her soul into the hands of eternity. A high priest stepped forward. His robes were heavy with gold. The mask of a jackal hid his face, the face of Anubis, the god of the dead. His voice was deep, echoing like the wind through stone tombs. "Tonight," he said, "you are Hathor reborn. You are not flesh. You are the bridge between the world of gods and the heart of Pharaoh. What happens here is not sin. It is the most sacred act that keeps Egypt alive." Nephru tried to bow, but her knees shook. The cold floor of polished alabaster bit into her skin. Her heartbeat pounded like the drums outside, drowning out the chants, the music, the laughter. She could feel eyes on her, dozens of them, the elder priestesses, the attendants, the veiled nobles invited to witness, and above them all, from a golden balcony sat Ramesses Sekt, the living god, the ruler of all Egypt, a man who believed the sun rose and set at his command. He watched her not with lust, but with ownership. As if she were already his, the priest raised a bronze bowl. Inside burned blue fire, oil mixed with hallucinogenic herbs from Nubia. The smoke twisted in the air, coiling around Nephru's head like a serpent. She felt her mind grow light. The whispers became louder. The walls seemed to breathe. The gold on the altar melted in her eyes. Someone behind her whispered, "Do not fear, child. The goddess chooses only the pure." But purity meant nothing here. Not when purity was taken, not given. She felt the first touch of oil on her shoulders, cold, slippery, shining. It ran down her arms like liquid sun. The priest smeared symbols across her chest, each stroke sealing her fate. The drums grew faster. The chant deepened. Her breath caught in her throat, and then the torches dimmed. The priest lifted his hand toward Ramesses. "The gate is open," he said. "The offering awaits." The great doors to the inner chamber creaked open. Darkness spilled out like a living thing. Only a faint red glow came from within, the light of sacred coals burning before the hidden statue of Hathor. Nephru felt her feet move, though she had not willed them to. Each step echoed through the chamber. The sound of a girl walking into history or into ruin. Behind her, the heavy doors began to close. Thud, 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 until only a narrow slit of light remained. And then, even that disappeared. No one outside those walls ever truly knew what happened inside the chamber of Hathor's breath. Some said the girl became possessed by the goddess herself. Others whispered she was given to the pharaoh that night to ensure the fertility of the kingdom. But the truth, the real truth, was darker. It was older than the pharaoh, older than Egypt itself. For Nephru's night was not a single event. It was part of a system, a network of temples, priests, and power designed to feed the hunger of gods and men alike. A system that took the bodies of girls like Nephru, dressed them in gold, and called it holiness. And as the fires of the festival burned outside, and as the people sang praises to their living God, one young girl in that chamber learned what divine service truly meant. But before I tell you exactly what happened in that sealed chamber, I need to show you the system that made it all possible. Before we return to Nephru, before that chamber's truth is told, you must understand the system that created her destiny. Because in ancient Egypt, power was not just about kings or wars. It was about control of the sacred. And no one controlled the sacred more completely than the priests of the temples and the royal family who stood above all law. Imagine the empire at its height. The year is around 1250 BC. The Nile is full, the granaries overflow, and the temples of stone stretch across the land like the bones of gods themselves. Every city has a god, every god has a priest, and every priest bows only to Pharaoh, the man believed to be a living sun. But what people rarely saw, what they were never meant to see, was how religion and pleasure, faith and fear, were tied together like a serpent eating its own tail. From birth, Egyptians were told the Pharaoh was not just a man. He was the son of Ra, the husband of Isis, the living Horus. To serve him, even in the most intimate way, was not sin, it was salvation. So when the priests spoke of holy unions, of sacred pleasure as a path to fertility and divine favor, no one dared to question. To question was to curse the Nile. To curse the Nile was to kill Egypt itself. And so a system of spiritual slavery grew inside marble temples. The priests claimed it was divine. The nobles whispered it was destiny. And the girls, the chosen ones, were told it was an honor. From a young age, scouts from the temple visited villages. They searched for girls who met their secret list of signs. Skin as bright as moon milk, eyes shaped like lotus petals, voices soft enough to calm sacred animals, a birthmark shaped like a falcon, a star, or a drop of flame. When a girl was chosen, her parents wept, not always from pride. For some, it meant a future of gold and luxury. For others, it meant their child would never truly belong to the living again. These girls were taken to temple schools, hidden from the world, raised not as daughters, but as offerings. Inside the temples, a single belief ruled everything. The body is a vessel of the gods. Through pleasure, through pain, through ritual, the divine speaks. It was the perfect justification. The priests could do anything and call it sacred. The Pharaoh could demand anything and call it divine will. Even the nobles believed they were chosen by birth to taste the nectar of heaven, as old carvings describe it. Those at the top were not bound by human rules. They claimed they were not human at all. At the very top stood the Pharaoh, the living sun. Below him, the high priests of Amun, Ptah, and Hathor. Below them, the nobles and scribes who carried out commands. And far below, at the base of the pyramid, were the temple girls, the servants and the silent victims of the system. Every year, during the great festivals, the flow of power moved downward, like wine being poured from a golden jar. Divine blessing, royal desire, priestly ritual, human sacrifice. The people cheered outside the walls, believing their king was pleasing the gods. But behind those walls, the rituals grew darker, stranger, and crueler. Many scrolls and carvings from that era speak of unions with the divine. On one temple wall in Thebes, a faded text reads, "The goddess Hathor descended as light. Her vessel was the young one, anointed in myrrh. Through her, Egypt was fed. To the common people, it meant the gods blessed the harvest. To the priests, it meant something else, something secret. It was a coded confession that the body of a girl was used as a vessel for divine power, and that this ritual was necessary to keep the land alive. That belief became law. Pharaoh Ramesses II built temples for the gods. but also for himself. His statues were taller than towers, his image carved beside the gods he claimed to equal. If a man is told every day that he is a god, what crime can he commit? None, because his word is the law. So when he commanded that the royal court must hold night offerings in the name of Hathor, no one refused. When he demanded new girls for the temple ceremonies, no one questioned. Even the priests obeyed, for they too lived on his favor. In this world, obedience was safety, silence was survival, and holiness was the perfect disguise for hunger. There was one ritual whispered about Imankrin, even feared among the priestesses. It was called the breath of the goddess. During the ceremony, young initiates were locked inside a sealed chamber filled with smoke and perfume until they lost their sense of time. When they awoke, they were told the goddess had touched them, but they remembered nothing. To the priests, it was proof of divine presence. To the girls, it was a nightmare they could never name. Nefru's initiation was one of those ceremonies, and while the people outside danced, thinking the gods were being pleased, inside those golden walls, the system continued to feed itself, silent, efficient, merciless. So now you know the truth. It was not one girl's fate. It was a machine of belief powered by fear, luxury, and lies, turning the innocent into tools of devotion. And this system lasted for centuries. But what happened to the chosen ones, the girls like Nefru? Once they entered the temple, how were they trained? What were they taught to do? The answer is even darker. Subscribe now. This will change how you see history. Comment what you know. Watch till the end for real names and proof. Before Nefru became Hathor reborn, before the gold touched her skin and the priest called her divine, she was just a child. She came from a small village near Abydos, where the river curled like a blue snake through the sand. Her father was a scribe, her mother a weaver. They had little, but they had peace. Until the temple scouts came. The scouts rowed in painted boats carrying lotus flowers and scrolls sealed with the mark of the high priest. They spoke softly with smiles that hid steel. They said they were looking for the chosen of the goddess. Children touched by beauty and purity, gifts sent from the heavens. When they saw Nefru, they nodded. Her skin was pale under the sun, her eyes calm, her posture humble. Her mother wept with pride. Her father bowed and said, "She will serve the gods well." But in the days after the boat left, he never slept again. The temple where Nefru arrived was not like any palace she'd imagined. It was cold, silent, built of stone so smooth it seemed alive. There were no windows, only slits for air. The walls smelled of oil, sweat, and incense. Girls of all ages lived there, some as young as 9, some already women. Each wore the same linen wrap. Each moved with the same careful silence. The first thing they were taught was obedience. If they spoke without permission, they were whipped with thin reeds dipped in perfume, so the pain carried a sweet smell that made them dizzy. If they cried, they were told, "The goddess does not cry. You are not a child now." After obedience came grace. They learned to walk with jars of water balanced on their heads, to dance in slow hypnotic circles, to bow so low their foreheads touched the marble floor. Each movement was drilled until their bodies forgot freedom. Then came the music. Harp, flute, drum, endless rhythms of devotion. The same songs every day, the same notes repeated until they melted into the blood. When the priestesses sang, it was like a spell. Their voices rose together in soft waves that made the air tremble. The girls learned to breathe in time with the rhythm. They learned how to look serene, even when they were shaking inside. At 12, the training changed. They were introduced to the Chamber of Fragrance, a room filled with lamps, herbs, and soft cushions. There, older priestesses taught them how to please the gods. But the words they used were cloaked in mystery. You must become light. You must make the divine feel at home in your body. They learned to mix oils that could numb the skin or awaken it. They learned how to touch, how to move, how to control a man's breath with just a glance. Every gesture, every smile was practice. Every mistake was punished, and yet they were told this was holy. If a girl hesitated, a priest would whisper, This is not lust. This is offering, and if she refused, she was sent to the outer temple to clean floors, a silent warning to the others. By 14, Nephru could no longer remember the sound of her mother's voice. She had become what they wanted, soft, obedient, graceful. When she looked into the bronze mirror, she saw not a girl but an idol. Painted, perfumed, perfect. She didn't recognize her own eyes anymore. The temple had changed her soul. She was told that her thoughts were not her own, that her body now belonged to the goddess, that her name itself, Nephru, meant the beautiful one chosen by fate. And then, at 15, came the night of breath. The girls who had reached womanhood were taken to a hall filled with golden bowls and burning oils. The air was thick, heavy with blue smoke. They drank from cups that made their heads light and their fears fade. Mixtures of wine and crushed lotus, poppy and blue lily. They were told that in the smoke, Hathor herself would appear. The priests began to chant. The walls shimmered. Shadows danced like ghosts. Then came the touch of oil, cool at first, then burning like the sun. Their bodies glowed under torchlight as the priests drew symbols across their skin, spirals, eyes, wings, suns. The girls swayed, half awake, half dreaming. In that trance they were declared holy vessels, and what followed was what Nephru would one day live through in that final chamber. Once initiated, a girl was no longer allowed to walk outside the temple without permission. She was now part of the royal circle, the keepers of the sun. She would attend feasts, festivals, and rituals. All was silent, all was graceful. She could be summoned to the pharaoh's palace at any time. If she pleased him, she would live surrounded by gold, gifts, and servants. If she displeased him, she might disappear before the next moonrise. Many priestesses told stories of the others, girls who lost favor, who spoke too loudly, who looked away during a ceremony. They were sent to the House of Silence, a building by the river where no one returned from. For a short time, the chosen lived like queens. Silk robes, jeweled anklets, the finest perfumes. They were treated as divine beings. Every gesture of theirs a prophecy. But beauty fades, and when it fades, so does worth. At 25, a temple girl was considered old. Her role would shift from sacred vessel to teacher of purity. She would train the next generation, the next Nephru. Some accepted their fate. Others tried to escape, slipping through the alleys of Thebes or hiding among pilgrims. Few survived long, because the temple never lost its property. Even in freedom, the eyes of the gods followed them. Or so they were told. Every girl who entered the temple gave up her past, her name, her will. And in return, she was told she had become part of eternity. But eternity was a prison, a beautiful one, lined with gold and song. This was the cost of holiness. This was the price of the divine. And while Nephru's story was only beginning, another figure was already watching from the shadows, someone whose fate would soon collide with hers. A woman named Pearl, a high priestess of Hathor, once a favorite of Pharaoh Ramesses II, now a rival to every young initiate who dared shine too brightly. But before I tell you what happened when Nephru met Pearl and how power turned one woman's jealousy into another's nightmare, you need to see how the elites themselves joined the ritual, because without their hunger, none of this could exist. The night after Nephru's initiation, the city of Ramesses glittered like the surface of the Nile beneath 1,000 lamps. The festival of renewal reached its height, the night when Pharaoh Ramesses II and his chosen circle would perform the rite of the living gods to the common people. It was a celebration of light and abundance. To the chosen few inside the palace, it was a ceremony of possession, where gods were said to walk in human skin. Nephru was carried to the palace in a golden litter. The curtains around her shimmered with gold thread. The smell of blue lotus filled the air. She had been told to smile, to move like sunlight through mist. Outside, the crowds cheered. Inside, the guards bowed and whispered, "The goddess comes." Her bare feet touched the cool marble of the great hall of mirrors, where light danced from bronze and crystal. Before her stood Pharaoh Ramesses II, his body painted in gold, his crown heavy with rubies. His eyes, dark and sharp, seemed to see through her skin. Next to him stood a woman, older, proud, and cold. Her name was Bwrl, the high priestess of Hathor, the woman who had once stood where Nefru now stood. She watched the young girl with eyes like sharpened obsidian. Rameses raised his hand. The drums stopped. Only the deep hum of chanting priests filled the air. Tonight, Rameses declared, the gods live through us. The sun burns within the body of man, and the moon glows within the body of woman. Together they bring life to Egypt. The high priest lit 2 great fires, one of gold, one of blue. Between them stood Nefru, trembling beneath her linen veil. Bwrl stepped forward. Her voice was calm, but her words were blades. "Do you understand what you are, child?" "I am the vessel of Hathor," Nefru whispered. "No," Bwrl said. "You are her breath, a moment that vanishes when the fire dies." She brushed a line of oil along Nefru's neck and stepped back into the shadows. The music began again, slow, hypnotic. Flutes wept, drums murmured, and the scent of burning amber drifted through the hall. Nefru was told to dance. She moved as she had been taught, slow circles, bending, lifting, glowing in the torchlight. Every movement had meaning. Every gesture was a prayer. The nobles watched from behind golden screens. Their eyes glittered through the slits, hungry and reverent at once. To them she was not a girl. She was a promise, the link between their pleasure and the Nile's next flood. Rameses watched in silence. His fingers clenched the arm of his throne. He believed the goddess truly moved within her, that every turn of her body was the will of the divine, and so the living god began to worship the living goddess, a circle of illusion feeding itself. When the dance ended, Nefru knelt before the pharaoh. He touched her chin and smiled. "The goddess smiles through you," he said. Those words were poison to Bwrl. For years she had been the chosen one, the vessel of Hathor. She had stood at Ramesses' side during his greatest victories. Now replaced by a trembling child, she felt her divine mask crack. That night, as the feasting began, Bwrl whispered to the priests, "The new girl is too pure, too untested. The gods may reject her." They nodded, because in the temple, the high priestess's word could make or destroy anyone. The celebration that followed was unlike any mortal feast. Tables of bronze and ivory stretched through the hall, covered with honey cakes, roasted doves, dates dripping in wine, and goblets of red pomegranate juice. The air grew hot with perfume and desire. The nobles laughed too loudly. Their gold bracelets clinked like chains. Every glance carried meaning, every smile a promise. At the head of the table, Rameses sat between Nefru and Bwrl. He fed each of them with his own hand, one with tenderness, the other with dominance. It was not love. It was performance. Every act, every sip of wine, every whispered word was watched by the priests, who would later record it as divine union. To the empire, this feast was sacred. To those who lived it, it was survival. When the drums began again, the guests withdrew. Only the pharaoh, his priests, and his 2 chosen women remained. The inner chamber glowed red with firelight. A bronze statue of Hathor towered over them, her eyes set with emeralds. At her feet, bowls of oil burned, releasing smoke that blurred the edges of reality. Bwrl led Nefru forward. The girl's body was trembling, her breath shallow. The priests began to chant in low voices, words older than memory. Through her, the goddess breathes. Through him, the sun burns. The ritual had begun again, not for devotion, but for control. Rameses believed that by joining with the chosen vessel, he renewed his divine right to rule. Bwrl believed that by guiding it, she kept her power alive. But for Nefru, it was a night of fear and surrender, a night she would remember only in fragments. Through smoke and trembling and silence, outside the palace walls, the city slept. The people dreamed of their pharaoh, the man they thought could speak to the gods. They had no idea what their prayers had paid for. Inside, the right of the living gods ended. The priests sealed the chamber, and the high priestess smiled, because while Rameses believed the ritual had blessed him, Bwrl had begun to plan something else, a quiet punishment for the girl who had stolen her place. By dawn, Nephru was carried back to the temple. Her body was covered in sacred oils, her hair tangled with gold threads. She felt hollow, as if the goddess had taken more than her strength. She was told she had served Egypt. She was told she was now untouchable. But inside, she only felt silence. From that morning on, Borel began to watch her closely. In lessons, in prayers, in the corridors of incense, the high priestess spoke softly, but her eyes said, "You will not last." This was how the elites of Egypt lived, every emotion hidden behind ceremony, every desire disguised as worship, every cruelty covered in gold leaf and perfume. They believed they were divine. They believed the gods smiled upon their games. And they built temples, not for heaven, but for themselves. This was the true Egypt of the inner circle, where the pharaoh's hand was law, where the priest's chants hid the cries of the voiceless, and where the goddess of love had become the mask of power. But before we face what Borel would do to Nephru, before we watch how jealousy, greed, and fear tear the temple apart, you must see how the elites truly lived behind the marble and gold, their pleasures, their secrets, their hidden power. Because to understand their downfall, you must first walk through their paradise. When the morning sun rose over Pi-Ramesses, the golden roofs of the palace caught fire in its light. The city sparkled, a living jewel in the desert. But inside those shining walls, everything was a lie. To the people, the pharaoh and his priests lived in perfect holiness. To those within, it was a world of gold and fear, of endless desire and silent punishment. Here, beauty was a weapon, and holiness was only another word for control. The royal palace was not a single building. It was a city within a city, dozens of halls, gardens, baths, and secret chambers hidden behind walls of white limestone. Every room smelled of incense and honeyed wine. Every corner gleamed with copper mirrors, polished so finely they reflected even candlelight, like the sun itself. Servants walked barefoot, heads bowed, eyes down. They spoke only when asked. The sound of their footsteps was the rhythm of power. At the center of this world sat Ramesses II, the sun in human form. Every hour of his life was ritual. Even his meals were offerings. Each morning he was bathed in milk and perfumed oils. Priests recited hymns as gold dust was brushed over his arms. He was never seen without jewels, never touched without permission. He ate from bowls of silver and drank from cups carved with his own face. To touch him was to touch the divine. To displease him was to vanish. Around him moved the circle of chosen women, the concubines, priestesses, and dancers who filled the palace like living ornaments. They were trained to smile, to flatter, to soothe the god-king's moods. But behind every gentle glance burned the same hunger, survival. Every woman knew that one whisper from the pharaoh could raise her to glory or condemn her to silence. The ones who pleased him were given jewels, lands, even small temples built in their name. The ones who failed were quietly erased. Nephru was now one of them. After her initiation, she became a regular guest at the palace, a silent beauty dressed in white linen and gold beads. The people called her the Dove of Hathor. But to the high priestess Borel, she was a shadow that threatened to steal her light. Borel had ruled the temple of Hathor for more than 10 years. She knew every secret in every whispered confession, every forbidden act hidden behind incense and prayer. Her power came not from faith, but from knowledge. She knew which nobles bribed priests for favor. She knew which generals sought blessing before battle. She knew which queens sent girls to the temple to spy on their rivals. And she kept those secrets close, trading them for gifts, land, and influence. Her palace quarters overflowed with perfumes, silks, lapis jewels, and carved ivory boxes. Yet, even in all her luxury, she feared one thing: replacement. Nephru was young, graceful, and favored by the pharaoh. The priests whispered that she was the true vessel of Hathor. And in a world ruled by illusions, belief was more dangerous than truth. Each month during the Feast of the Two Lands, the nobles gathered to celebrate Egypt's victories. They dined in halls draped with gold-threaded banners and floors strewn with rose petals. Musicians played harps and flutes. Wine flowed like the Nile. Guests lay on couches carved from ebony, their skin glistening with oils. They were attended by slaves who poured wine until it spilled down the sides of the cups, staining the marble red. The air shimmered with heat and perfume, and at the center of it all, the pharaoh, radiant, untouchable. His eyes were half closed as dancers moved before him, their bodies painted with silver dust. Among them was Nefru, her every movement watched by Bwirl's sharp gaze. The feast was not only pleasure, it was politics. Every smile, every gesture was a bargain. Every word was a test of loyalty. In the palace, love did not exist. Only favor, the fragile currency of the powerful. If a noble angered the pharaoh, his land could be taken overnight. If a priest whispered against him, his tongue could be cut out. Fear kept the court in motion like a wheel of fire, Nefru learned quickly. She spoke little, observed everything, and never trusted a single promise. She understood that her survival depended not on beauty, but on silence. Bwirl understood too. So she began to turn others against her. She told the priests, "The girl has grown proud. She forgets the goddess and listens only to her vanity." She told the nobles, "Ramesses favors a child over wisdom. The gods may punish such arrogance." And slowly, the whispers began to spread. That Nefru was dangerous, that her beauty hid ambition, that the goddess herself might turn away from Egypt if she remained in favor. While the people prayed outside, thinking the temples were houses of light, the inner chambers of the elites turned darker. They sought not salvation, but immortality, through any means. Some drank mixtures of crushed gemstones and mercury, believing it made their souls eternal. Others held secret rebirth ceremonies, bathing in the blood of sacred animals or burning herbs, said to bring visions of the afterlife. All of it was hidden beneath the language of holiness. The priests justified it easily. The body of the pharaoh must never die. The goddess must feed him her essence. And so, rituals continued, strange, silent, dangerous. Nefru saw too much. She began to understand that holiness was only the mask of fear, that the gods they worshipped were reflections of their own hunger. For a year, Nefru was favored. She lived in golden rooms, wore jewels from Nubia, and was carried through the gardens like a flower in bloom. Ramesses gifted her a necklace shaped like the rising sun, a symbol that she was under his protection. But favor is as fragile as glass. One evening, during a ritual, Nefru faltered in her chant, only for a moment. But that moment was enough. Bwirl seized it. "The goddess is displeased," she declared before the priests. "The vessel is impure. Her heart is divided." Ramesses, already proud and paranoid, believed her. For how could a mortal question a high priestess who claimed to speak for the gods? Nefru's necklace was taken. Her name was struck from the temple scrolls. She was sent back to the sanctuary, silent, disgraced, alone. But even in disgrace, the elites never feared death. They believed their bodies were only temporary homes. Their tombs were palaces underground, filled with gold, food, and servant statues to serve them forever. Ramesses had already ordered his eternal house, a mountain tomb filled with carvings of his victories. Bwirl too had built her shrine with murals showing her crowned beside Hathor. They believed that in death they would walk as gods. But they had already become something else, empty souls wrapped in gold. Nefru began to see that truth, that the gods they served were not watching from above, but looking out from the mirrors of their own greed. She waited silently for her chance. But she could not know that Egypt itself was beginning to rot, that whispers of corruption and blasphemy were spreading beyond the palace walls. The people were beginning to doubt. And when faith dies, empires tremble. But before I show you the fall, the rumors, the betrayals, and the judgment that came for them all, you must see how the corruption began to bleed through the gold. The mask would soon crack. The goddess of love would turn her face away, and what happened next would shake the throne of the living God himself. The year was near the end of Ramesses' reign. The desert winds had changed. The Nile no longer flooded as it once did, and the people said the gods were angry. But inside the palace, the feasts continued. The smell of wine, the laughter of nobles, the flicker of torches, all pretending that the empire was eternal. Yet beneath that glittering surface, fear and rot spread like infection. It began with a rumor, just a small whisper carried by the servants. The goddess Hathor no longer answers. The priests tried to silence it, but it spread faster than smoke. Because deep down even the priests felt it. Something was wrong. The sacred pools turned cloudy. The temple birds stopped singing. Even the golden idols seemed to lose their shine. The signs that once promised prosperity now looked like warnings, and in the center of it all, Whirl. For years she had ruled with secrets and beauty, but now her whispers, her alliances, her control, all began to collapse. The nobles who once flattered her now called her cursed. The young priestesses she had trained began to fear her eyes, and the pharaoh, grown older, surrounded by flatterers and ghosts, started to wonder if the goddess had truly turned her face away. Whirl grew desperate. She performed longer rituals, demanded greater sacrifices, and claimed visions that never came. Each failure only deepened suspicion. Then, one night, during a festival, a priest collapsed mid-prayer, his mouth foaming, his skin turning pale. The crowd screamed that the offering was poisoned, and though no one spoke her name aloud, everyone looked toward Whirl. In the shadows of that same night, Nefru was called back to the temple. She had spent months in silence, tending to herbs and caring for the sick. But the high priest now said the goddess had chosen her again. They whispered, "Only the dove of Hathor can purify what has been defiled." And so, the same girl who once trembled before the altar returned, not as a servant, but as a judge. The people adored her. The priests feared her. And Whirl hated her. Rumors thickened like the desert air before a storm. Some said Whirl had used forbidden herbs in her rituals, mixtures that caused visions and madness. Others claimed she had bribed or seduced nobles to keep her power. And others whispered the darkest thing of all, that she had tried to become the goddess herself. The pharaoh demanded a sign. He ordered both women, Whirl and Nefru, to perform the ritual of light. A sacred ceremony meant to prove divine favor. Before thousands, in the grand hall of the temple, torches burned bright. Incense filled the air, and the two women stood before the statue of Hathor, gold against darkness, beauty against age. When Nefru began to sing the ancient hymn, her voice trembled at first, but soon it rose, soft, pure, like wind through reeds. The air grew calm. The torches flickered. Even the guards fell silent. Then Whirl began. Her voice cracked, her hands shook, and suddenly the torch fell. The flame caught her robe. Screams filled the hall. Priests rushed forward, but it was too late. Whirl fell before the altar, her body burning in front of the goddess she once claimed to serve. The people gasped. Some said it was punishment from Hathor. Others whispered it was murder, arranged by the court to silence her forever. No one ever knew the truth. After that night, something broke in the heart of Egypt. Ramesses withdrew from the world. He no longer joined the festivals or appeared before the people. His face grew thin. His once mighty voice sounded hollow. The temples, once overflowing with gifts, now stood half empty. The farmers cursed the priests, saying the gods had stolen their food. Gold could no longer buy faith. Nefru remained in the temple for years, performing rituals to heal the land. But each season, the Nile shrank lower, and the city grew quieter. Some said she carried a curse. Others said she was the last true believer. And then, one dawn, she vanished, centuries later. When the sand swallowed the palaces and temples, travelers found carvings, faint, broken images of two women before a burning altar. One was crowned with stars, the other bowed in fire. Scholars argued for ages. Was it truth or myth? Was Nefru a saint or a tool of the priests? Was Whirl a villain or the last woman who dared to speak against power? No one could say for certain, because Egypt, in its silence, had buried its own guilt. Today, when historians speak of Ramesses II, they call him the Great. They talk of monuments, victories, and his endless glory. But few speak of the women behind the throne, the ones whose bodies and souls paid the price for that greatness. They forget the temples of secret initiation. They forget the voices that were never written in stone. And they forget that for every empire's glory, there is always a trail of tears beneath it. In the end, the temples of Hether fell silent. The golden idols gathered dust. The wind blew through their ruins like the breath of forgotten ghosts. But some nights, under the moonlight, travelers say they still hear singing, a soft, trembling voice, the voice of a girl who once stood in the chamber of gods, the voice of Nephru, the dove of Hathor, calling out across time, and, if you listen closely, you can still hear her whisper, "Beauty is not a blessing. It is a cage." But before we end this story, we must face one final truth, not about Egypt, not about temples, but about us. Because what happened to Nephru and Whirl was not ancient magic. It was human greed, and it still lives in every system that worships power more than life itself. The sun sets over the ruins of Thebes. The sand glows red like blood. Once this place sang with hymns to the gods. Now only the wind answers back. The statues that once stood proud and perfect are cracked, their faces eaten by time. The temples that smelled of myrrh and rose oil now smell only of dust and bones. And there, in the silence, the story of Nephru and Whirl still waits. A story buried not by the desert, but by the shame of those who built paradise upon pain. Think of Nephru, 15 years old, trembling in the glow of golden lamps, told that her fear was holiness. She believed that giving herself was a duty to the gods. She believed the priests spoke truth. She believed that the pharaoh was divine. Now imagine her years later watching those same gods fall, watching the same men who once praised her turn away, watching the temple crumble, realizing that it was all built on lies. The pain of that moment was the true death of Egypt's soul, because when faith becomes fear and holiness becomes control, what is left? Nothing but ashes. The great Ramesses II wanted eternity. He built monuments to outlast time. He covered his tomb in gold so bright it was said the sun refused to set on his empire. But eternity does not come from gold. It comes from memory, and memory cannot be bought. His tomb was broken open by grave robbers, his jewels melted, his body carried away, unwrapped, measured, and studied like a specimen. The god became a display. The king became a relic. All that remains is the silence of the people who once bowed, who once feared, who once called him divine. And in that silence lies the question that echoes through time. Was it worth it? Behind every empire, there are names we never read in history books. The girls taken too young. The servants who saw everything but could tell no one. The priestesses who believed until belief killed them. The faces carved out of stone, erased so the next ruler could claim perfection. Nephru, Whirl, the nameless thousands. They were not myths. They were human. They breathed, laughed, cried, hoped. They were told that their bodies were altars, that their suffering was sacred, that obedience was salvation, but their only sin was trust. Time is the cruelest god of all. It spares no pharaoh, no priest, no temple. It strips away the gold, the lies, the chants, until only truth remains. And the truth is simple. Power always consumes itself. The higher it rises, the more it fears falling. The more it fears falling, the crueler it becomes. And when cruelty becomes law, collapse is only a matter of time. Egypt was not destroyed by enemies. It was destroyed by its own hunger, by the belief that the few were chosen to own the many, by the illusion that holiness could hide corruption. Listen carefully. This story is not only ancient. It still lives in our world. Every empire that worships greed, every system that silences truth, every leader who demands devotion. They are the new pharaohs. Their palaces may be of glass and steel, not gold and limestone, but the pattern is the same. There are still Nephrus, young, innocent, promised beauty and safety, only to be used and discarded. There are still Whirls, ambitious, powerful, twisted by the very system they helped build. There are still Ramesses, men who believe they can cheat time, and there are still temples, only now they are called corporations, governments, industries. And they too whisper, what happens here is not sin. It is sacred. It keeps the land alive. Different words. Same lie. The fall of Egypt is not just history. It is a mirror. And every time we ignore the suffering hidden behind wealth and power, we help build another golden cage. Nephru's story asks us one question, a question no empire wants to answer. How many lives must be sacrificed to feed one God's hunger? When you see injustice wrapped in beauty, when you see cruelty disguised as order, remember Egypt. Remember that every throne is built on sand. And one day the wind will come, night falls over the ruins. The stars rise, the same stars that Nephru once looked upon from her temple roof. For a moment the desert glows silver, and it feels as if the past is breathing again. You can almost hear the music of flutes. You can almost see the torches flicker. You can almost feel the warmth of gold on your skin. Then, silence. Only the whisper of wind. Only the echo of a girl's voice. Remember me not as the vessel, she says. Remember me as the one who saw through the lie. The sands shift. The ruins sleep again. The gods remain silent. But the truth still speaks. If you have watched this far, you already know. This was never just a story about ancient Egypt. It was a warning, a mirror held up to power, a voice calling from beneath the sand saying, do not let beauty blind you. Do not let ritual silence your heart. And never believe that those in gold are closest to the gods, because every time we forget, the cycle begins again. So, remember Nephru, remember Bwirl, remember the child who stood naked in the golden temple, trembling, believing she was chosen. Remember that she was not divine, she was human. And her story is ours. Comment, were they victims or believers? Subscribe, share, watch the next expose, because history is not dead. It is warning us again and again to open our eyes before the gods of power close them forever.